from Bohemia, where fighting had just finished as the Bremen army moved in and occupied the city. All communication has been lost, no wires or radio signals coming out of the city in the last 4 days. The Bremen Empire has not commented on the situation, and the Eastern Union refuses to comment, and they claim to not have any intelligence on the issue. Attempts have been made to use the railway telegram connections to hail the last train known to have departed the city, but the crew of the train has been unable to be reached. The Midnight Gazette is reporting their journalist in the field, Karin, is past due to report in. Passenger manifest shows that 14 people were on the train traveling to the city. The fate of those on the train is also unknown at the moment. Initial reports coming out of the area describe a mass casualties event, possibly due to radiation or chemical poisoning, but reports are conflicting and unclear. The first people known to have escaped the area are referring to this event as the Termina of Bohemia, the Cataclysm of Prehevil.
The death of innocence, the birth of a god.
Hi, I'm John, and thanks for checking out my video. Quick disclaimer, this game does have some dark and very adult themes and topics, so viewer beware if that's not something you're into right now. Also, a spoiler warning for all of Fear Hunger 1 and 2, we will be talking about some of the secrets and the endings. Shout out to the wiki.gg and the community that maintains it for notes, info, and a really helpful map. Fear and Hunger 2 is a PC indie survival horror RPG taking place in the city of Prehevil in 1942 on the fictional continent of Europa. The Second Great War has been ravaging the continent and has just come to a ceasefire as the Bremen army wrestled the city of Prehevil from the Eastern Union. Not long thereafter, 14 unrelated people on the same train heading to Prehevil had a vision from the messenger of the moon god, telling them that they are participating in the Festival of Termina and that only one of them will be alive in 3 days. The 14 participants wake up from their shared dream and realize the train is stopped and has been abandoned on the outskirts of the city, which has been covered in a deep fog, and the Bremen army has recently invaded. One by one, they head into the city to try to find out what's going on. These are their stories. Daan, the doctor, the blank soul. Daan grew up in the kingdom of Rondon. His parents were followers of Sylvian, having joined the Bunny Mask cult. As they traveled to different cities in Europa, he would often see him donning bunny mask and heading off to the meadows naked with others for the rituals of Sylvan. Daan hated that his parents would be more focused on their religion than caring for him, always choosing their forest rituals rather than spending time with him. They even tried to pass on the healing gift of Sylvian to him. One day, his parents never came back after spending too much time in the meadows and finally succumbing to the ritual, lost in the trance. At a young age, Daan would eventually build up to becoming the apprentice of a butler, which led Daan to start working for Baron Einar von Dutch, learning to appreciate the finer things in life, and also learning about how upper crust society lives. Over time, he became acquainted and grew closer to the Baron's daughter Elise. Elise was sympathetic and helped Daan process his childhood and his trauma from his parents' neglect and their having chosen an old god over him. The Baron had a growing interest in the occult and how Sylvian's gift of healing worked. The Baron took great interest in Daan when he learned that in his upbringing, he had been exposed to the Sylvian cult and the gift of healing. In exchange for his knowledge on Sylvian, Einher, a doctor himself, would teach Daan about the modern scientific ways of medicine, thereby combining ancient knowledge and modern science. Though he would never get an official doctor's diploma, Daan would become a natural healer and learn thoroughly about the biological mechanisms of life. In adulthood, Daan and Elise were able to finally be together, with the Baron's blessing. But it wouldn't be too long into this happy union before the drums of war started. The Eastern Union and the Bremen Empire would soon be at war, along with all their allies. Conscription and draft orders were sent out, and all able-bodied men would be conscripted for the war effort. Daan chose to serve as a medic attached to the infantry, and he saw the unspeakable horrors of war firsthand. Letters from home kept his sanity intact, but before long, these would stop. After the Kingdom of Rondon withdrew from the war, he rushed back home only to find the dark tragedy that was waiting for him. In the basement of the manor, his fiancée Elise and Baron Einher von Dutch. The occult had completely taken over the manor, and Elise and the Baron had sacrificed themselves in order to please the old gods with a sacrificial ritual. Out of desperation, Daan attempted to resurrect his fiancée by sacrificing his left eye in an old ritual. Unfortunately, his attempts to save her were unsuccessful. Daan was shattered, understandably, as he tried to find a reason why they all died, other than the whims of uncaring gods. He started searching through the Baron's papers and documents in his home and desk, trying to understand what drove him to do this. He kept finding references and documents from a town called Prehevil. He didn't know why, but he put together that the ritual the Baron had attempted originated from this town. Determined to find out why he lost the love of his life, he set off to Prehevil to discover what was the purpose of the ritual that took so much from him. Daan is fairly independent, quickly setting off on his own to investigate Prehevil. He tries to help those around him. For example, it's only natural for him to offer to mix drinks to the other participants in the Prehevil Bop. Daan can also be found caring for townspeople, trying to study what happened to the Moonscorch. He is often polite and even caring towards the other contestants, showing his compassionate side. But despite all this, Daan can also be callous, such as when he refuses to put a dying man out of his misery because he is bound by the Hippocratic Oath. In spite of his outwardly friendliness, he suffers from severe depression stemming from the mysterious and tragic death of his wife, Elise. It is also possible that he has been suffering for a long time considering his traumatic childhood. At various points, Daan makes reference to the stress that he faced in his childhood, as well as he is shown being protective towards younger contestants like Marina and Levi, possibly a way for him to help other children avoid the same situations. It's speculated that Daan got interested in the occult after studying the sigil in the ritual that claimed his fiancée and father-in-law, a ritual to the sulfur god, or possibly Rher. It's possible that Rher sent Pocket Cat to investigate or interfere with Daan's learning about the sulfur god, to prevent the human from learning and gaining esoteric power, while also preventing the sulfur god from gaining power, since he had been weakened with obscurity. If Daan moonscorches, he would take on the vest and mask of Pocket Cat, and from there on he would be found in the museum. During the festival, he would put his medical knowledge to use, studying the monstrosities they encounter, in an attempt to understand them scientifically, and harvesting useful organs from them. He would use this knowledge to be able to bring monsters down more effectively. Fighting Daan as Pocket Cat is an interesting encounter. Pocket Cat is a creature from Rher, so he promised not to interfere with the festival or the contestants. So he states that he can only hurt you by following your orders. So during the fight, he will continually ask you what limb he wants you to sever. So you'll have to pick between arms and legs as the fight continues. Man, or Catman, has a code I suppose. But what if Pocket Cat had a Pocket Cat? Abella, the engineer, caressing soul. Abella grew up in Odegrad, having a peaceful and serene childhood. She didn't have a chance to grow much, nor Odengard have a chance to rebuild after the Great War, before rumors of another war started spreading in Europa. It wasn't long after that, before the Second Great War broke out. Abella was too young to officially sign up and serve in the war, so she did what she could on the home front, utilizing her tinkering skills and natural talent with equipment. Helping repair equipment, this is when she started learning how to improvise weapons. Eventually, her propensity for tinkering led her to study mechanics and electronics. As an adult, Abella's expertise in engineering made her an essential contributor to the home front. With the men now dying on battlefields, someone had to step up and cover for them. She would shoulder the burden and the increasing workload. It's what she could do to help at the home front, helping source and repair material for the front. During one stormy night, Abella trudged through the rain-soaked alleyway on her way home from a long day of work at the workshop, her overalls covered in dust and oil. Suddenly, she noticed a strange man who had tried to run but collapsed weakly to the ground a few meters afterwards. Abella quickly realized that this man had been shot when she noticed the blood pooling on the sidewalk. Searching his possessions, she found documents indicating that he was from Rondon, one of Ordengard's allied countries. Abella would later discover that this man was a member of the underground resistance group, the Nameless Liberty Union, NLU. The organization had been quietly brewing beneath the surface these last few decades, since the beginning of the First Great War, and was working across Europa to resist both the Bremen Empire and the Eastern Union. She would eventually meet with a member of the NLU and join the organization. Abella's engineering expertise was greatly valued by the Nameless Liberty Underground, which was struggling to maintain membership. After some time, the NLU had gathered enough info to unravel parts of a larger scheme brewing with the Kaiser of the Bremen Empire. The Eastern Union was working on something ill-boding in the country of Bohemia, and the Bremen Empire wanted to get their hands on the project by any means possible. When the Bremen army finally occupied Bohemia, the NLU sent some of their members to Prehevil, but communication was quickly lost with them. The organization decided to wait to see if their members would resurface, but Bella was not content to sit and wait. She boarded the first train to Prehevil, determined to find out what happened, and was told if she ever needed support, she could reach out to the leader of the Bohemian branch of the NLU. But unbeknownst to her, she would play a part of the greater schemes by the trickster moon god Rher as one of the 14 Termina contestants. During the festival, she'd be able to use her knowledge of electronics to surpass locked doors. Her mechanical knowledge would allow her to craft improvised weapons and traps, like bear traps and the meat grinder. Abella would turn into the Chaugnar due to Moonscorch. Having a deformed head and elephant trunk, this muscular and strong abomination, with skin that is difficult to pierce, would be found underground in Tunnel 7. The Chaugnar can blow its horn so strongly that it can make someone's head explode if they hear it for too long. Levi, the child soldier, the solitary soul. Levi was born in Prehevil, the capital of Bohemia. He is one of the few natives from Prehevil among the 14 participants of the Festival of Termina. Levi was born into a sad relationship between his poor mother and alcoholic and violent father. Levi doesn't have any fond memories of the man. One night though, after a heated argument between his mother and his father, his mother rushed into Levi's room, shutting the door and trying to hold it shut. But it did little good to save her from the drunkard's wrath. Tragically, she would die by his hands, yet another victim of domestic violence, leaving Levi without the one person that took care of him as a child. Levi's drunken father would continue to waste away under his alcoholism, indulging in the bottle, unable and unwilling to care for poor young Levi, leaving the young boy all alone in the world. Such a horrible way for a child to grow up. He would always remember his mother at the piano, playing jazz. In a different life, he would have liked to have learned how to play the piano. After being taken away from his father, Levi was sent to St. Domek's orphanage. However, it didn't do him much better, considering the staff there treated kids awfully, and there were rumors circulating around the place regarding the occasional disappearance of orphans, leaving no trace on why they disappeared. Not to mention the rooms in the basement that they could hear screaming from, and they were strictly forbidden to go down to the basement. He didn't stay there for long, as the Eastern Union began recruiting, although conscripting is a better word, every able-bodied male to fight for the motherland, no matter what their age. It essentially made Levi a child soldier, since he was only 13 when he was conscripted. Children being sent to war by old men playing on their maps. Levi was an exceptional and capable soldier despite his age. Understandably, he started to become bitter and nihilistic as he kept seeing kids his age and younger being dragged into the war and dying as cannon fodder as this war dragged on. As time went on, he was getting his own squad of child soldiers that he was in charge of. They were assigned to what amounted to a suicide mission with little chance of success, as the upper echelons of the military didn't seem to think that they were more than chattel or meat to throw at the grinder, just faceless boys seen as expendable bodies. This mission was a turning point for Levi. Between the cruelty of his childhood, watching his mother's murder, being abandoned in this world as a child, along with his experiences at war, leading children where regardless of the decisions he made, he would feel responsible for their deaths. It was too much for him to bear. It was at this point that he became addicted to opiates, particularly heroin, which he turned to in his moment of weakness, looking for momentary escape. Alcohol wasn't enough anymore to make him feel numb. Could you blame him? Addiction is an insidious disease. It was the only way that Levi could turn off the pain and torment that he felt in his waking hours, and also when he closed his eyes at night. Eventually, he could no longer take it, and decided to desert and run away, going AWOL, abandonment without official leave. Since he had nowhere to go, he went back to the only place that he knew he could call home, Prehevil. However, little did he know, he would play a greater part in the scheme of the Moon God, as one of Termina's contestants. Levi puts his combat training to good use during the festival, being the most skilled participant with guns and rifles. His sharpshooting skills would be useful to put down some of the horrors he'd encounter. In spite of his skills with firearms, when he first encounters anyone, his first instinct is to run and put some distance between him and the stranger. Can you blame him? Later on, he would be found at the restaurant coping with his withdrawals. His moon-scorched form is the Weeping Scope, which will run away to the orphanage when you encounter him. Perhaps it's the remains of Levi running home to a place that was familiar. The orphanage might have been the closest he got to feeling like he belonged and was safe in this world. His moon-scorched form seems like a mockery of his skills at firearms, relying on a high rate of fire rather than the accuracy Levi was known for. He seems to easily form a bond with another Prehevil native, Marina. Maybe they find solace in each other since they share the loss of their hometown. Olivia, the botanist, the shadowed soul. Olivia is a botanist looking to find the whereabouts of her sister in the town of Prehevil. Olivia is a reserved, yet sometimes outgoing woman, being one of the only people in the train with openly friendly mannerisms and a caring personality. She seems like the type of person you'd like to have around on a difficult day. Olivia spent most of her childhood cooped up inside her parents' overbearingly religious household, finding escapism in books about botany and nature, along with the company of her twin sister Rayla, who preferred to go outside and make friends, while also dedicating herself to studying engineering and electronics. Olivia suffered multiple strokes in high school and was bedridden. Her parents turned to religious and faith healers, but her sister wanted them to seek modern medicine backed by science. By the time they were convinced, it was far too late. Olivia was diagnosed with an abnormality in her spinal cord that affected her blood flow. Even after going through extensive operations and several medical treatments, she would be bound to a wheelchair. Later in life, Olivia and her sister enrolled in the same university in Bremen, both relieved to finally be away from their parents' religious control. During her time in university, Olivia was great at making friends in college, but nevertheless was one of the best students in her class and excelled in her field. The same could be said for her sister, who got to participate in an exchange program between the Bremen Empire and the Eastern Union, much to Olivia's jealousy. Eventually, Olivia graduated and got to start on her own botany research in the biggest greenhouse in Bremen. Yet, she still felt like her sister outclassed her in every regard. Rayla would travel all over the world, keeping contact and telling Olivia about her work through letters. But one day, those letters came to a halt. After 6 months, Olivia's parents got information that her sister was supposedly accused of treason against the Bremen Empire, being kept in an undisclosed Bremen prison. Olivia was powerless about it. The only time she heard of her sister again was when news of a terrorist group called the Nameless Liberty Underground broke her sister out of prison. Olivia recognized the name of the organization, recalling that she had heard the Professor Rayla was seen over the years mentioning them in a passing conversation. She investigated where the professor had gone to, only to find out that he had been executed months ago, suspiciously enough also for treason. Riffling through his office, Olivia found several letters between the professor and Rayla. sent long after she graduated. In her last letter, Rayla had sent cryptic writings about a cube and how the Eastern Union was desperately trying to replicate the cube. Her last words, voicing concern that the Kaiser of the Bremen Empire was after the operation in Prehevil, and how she still had time to act by heading there herself. Olivia would rush there without delay. Olivia uses her scientific knowledge to her advantage. By utilizing local flora and extracting powerful substances from flowers and herbs, she can coat weapons with powerful poisons and craft herbal mixtures to help her heal injuries. Once day 3 starts, Olivia is no longer at the train, having been taken to the museum by a moon-scorched Daan, or having gone there by her own initiative. Her own moon-scorched form, the mechanical dance, will be roaming the insides of this location. Instead of legs, her form features a massive vent system, while her hands take on the shape of 2 blade-like appendages, appearing fused to her wheelchair. Despite the power and strength conveyed by her new form, the mechanical dance appears visibly distressed, weeping and lamenting that she has been this way forever. This might more so be a manifestation of her jealous fear of living in the shadow of her sister Rayla. This being reinforced by the fact that Olivia has the shadowed soul, as opposed to Rayla's radiating soul. She fears that the others will perceive her as solely through the lens of her disability, rather than recognizing her true capabilities and who she really is. It is possible the mechanical dance gravitated towards the museum due to its close proximity to the logic. The mechanized nature of the mechanical dance may be due to influence of the logic, the machine god, as Olivia had very strong ties to her sister Rayla. The logic has been shown to be able to interfere with the workings of Rher, so it might be possible that the logic is capable of tainting the moon-scorched forms of contestants. Ossa, the Yellow Mage, the Enlightened Soul. Ossa grew up in chaotic Abyssonia, where endless conflict and warring factions were the norm. He disliked those who fought over ancient disputes and over grudges passed down by their ancestors. Ossa found no solace in such beliefs, and knew that Europa, to the north, was no better. In Europa, they worshipped ancient cruel deities, and their disputes spilled across borders in endless cycles of great wars. And in some parts of Europa, there were rumors that human sacrifices were still practiced. He decided to leave his family and head to the City of the Sun, Ammon, to pursue an education in spiritualism and religion, determined not to be a pawn in the North's quest for the country's resources. There, he excelled as an apprentice. He sought to learn as much as possible before leaving the continent. At the Temple of Ammon, he had his choice of various spiritual schools to study from. He quickly excelled at the temple, surpassing even the older priest. However, he soon realized that religion was being used to control the masses, and he didn't want to serve the ruling class. Discovering an ancient scroll about the Yellow Mages, who harnessed the power of the gods for personal gain and believed in chaos, Ossa left the temple to find them in the eastern sanctuaries. Ossa arrived in the eastern sanctuaries and discovered that even the local temples follow the worship of Allmer, with religion dictating people's everyday lives. Despite facing scorn for his belief from scholars and religious leaders, Ossa remained unwavering. He eventually impressed the Yellow Mages with his conviction, and they invited him to join their own. They had been reduced to a small group of traveling mages who studied various fields of the otherworldly. Ossa joined them to further his personal growth and agenda using the force of the gods, continuing his path of learning and self-growth. The now magician Ossa eventually met Hadil Azif, a self-proclaimed wizard from the Far East who was gathering a troop of adventurers to accompany on a perilous quest to the infamous Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. He joined Hadil's group of adventurers and traveled through war-torn Europa. However, most of the crew quit halfway to Rondon due to the difficulties of crossing borders during these turbulent times of war. As they got closer to their destination, Ossa started having intense dreams, and the remaining members of the group were visibly sick from stress and otherworldly pressures. When they finally arrived at the dungeon, heavy fog made navigation impossible, and distant growls and howls added to the tension. Most of the group panicked and scattered, and Ossa ventured forward alone, leaving a sick and broken Hadil behind. And once again, a brave adventurer descended into the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger. As Ossa entered the ruins, he felt a burning sense of calling from beneath a heap of rocks. He dug through the piles with his bare hands, and eventually finding the source of the sensation. the burnt and mummified severed head of Nasra, the shit-talking wizard of the East. Osa was surprised to find that his master, who had been absent for so long, was surprisingly up to date with the twists and turns of the modern world. The master had a mission for him, something that could further his knowledge on dark matters greatly. As a yellow mage, Osa was supposed to follow his own ambition and greed, but he decided to play along to see what he could learn. After all, that was the common relationship between a master yellow mage and their apprentice. Nasra asked him to travel to a small country in Eastern Europa with the beheaded wizard to a town called Prehevil. His master promised events of cosmic proportions, something that would turn the tides of the world forever. The events that would play out in Prehevil would resonate everywhere. The talking head of the ancient wizard left out details from his story on purpose, but Osa expected that. With little information about the task at hand, he prepared for the trip. Every night, he saw nightmares of the horrors that awaited him in Prehevil, where he would be chosen as a contestant for the Festival of Termina, an event the foul-mouthed, crispy head of a wizard is apparently familiar with. Osa is an experienced magical practitioner whose time as a yellow mage has shaped the way that he views the world. He is very knowledgeable about both old and new gods, and will happily use their magic for his own benefit. Osa prefers to act alone and is distrustful of others, to the point of attacking those that he sees as a threat. Even after being placed in a vulnerable situation, he will still question those who offered help to him, only reluctantly offering to join them. He acts dismissive towards the other contestants and expresses hatred towards many aspects of the Western world. He is also not above making fun of other characters' religious beliefs and superstitions. I mean, the whole confession prank is pretty dick. No, don't pretend to be clergy and take people's confessions. That ain't cool. People tend to open up and say some very personal things in confession. Marcoh, the boxer, the tainted soul. Marcoh's earliest memories involved spending time with his parents, but he was suddenly left without them. It happened at such an early age he couldn't remember what happened, but he and his sister had to fend for themselves from there on in. At the tender age of 10 years old, he had to find a way to make a living, while raising his younger sister. In a dark world and alone, at least they had each other, and blood ran thicker than water. Marcoh had always known the streets to be harsh, having been bullied relentlessly as a young boy. He was never naive to how the world worked. However, as he grew older and filled out, he found that he could hold his own in a fight, often towering over his former tormentors. Despite his size and fighting ability, he never joined any local street gangs, nor became a thug for hire. Unfortunately, refusing to work for these small-time criminals only seemed to draw more trouble his way, with street fights becoming a regular occurrence. Marcoh's perspective began to shift when he realized that he was making more money from fighting than any other job, using his fist where he failed using tools. His reputation as a skilled fighter led to his participation in underground boxing matches, where the pay was better and the danger of knives was lower. Besides, it could be fun sometimes. Marcoh did at times enjoy the feeling of winning a match, hearing people cheering him on, and collecting some cash, making sure that he and his sister had food and shelter for another day. While Marcoh was focused on his fighting career, his sister had grown into a stunning young woman, and she learned about the predatory attention from unsavory characters that can sometimes bring. Fortunately, Marcoh's skills in the underground boxing ring had garnered him a reputation on the streets, which in turn became a useful tool in protecting his younger sister in a harsh world. Nobody wanted to be the guy that crossed Marcoh's sister. However, his sister would fall in love with Ricardo Accardo, a mobster and heir to the family crime syndicate in the Vatican. Ricardo Accardo took an interest in Marcoh's talents in violence and tried to recruit him, but Marcoh would always politely decline. Ricardo persisted, offering to hook Marcoh up with a real boxing trainer, and after some persuasion from his sister, Marcoh reluctantly agreed. Upon entering the gym for the first time, Marcoh felt a sense of professionalism that he had not experienced before. The elderly and experienced trainer, who had an impressive track record, was impressed with Marcoh's natural abilities and raw skill. Under the trainer's guidance, Marcoh's skills improved and he started to win bigger and bigger matches. Ricardo was able to organize more and more fights, and Marcoh found himself spending more time with the Accardo family, without realizing that he was slowly being pulled into the criminal world. Eventually, Ricardo revealed his true colors and demanded that Marcoh kill an opponent in a boxing match. Marcoh refused, never wanting to cross that line and take a life. But Ricardo threatened his sister's safety, leaving Marcoh with no choice but to comply. During the fight, Marcoh managed to knock out his opponent, but he didn't stop there. Under Ricardo's orders, he continued to pummel the man, even after he had hit the ground. The things he would do to protect his beloved sister, the only family he had left in this world. Looking at the blood on his hands, Marcoh realized he had killed the man. Marcoh bottled up how he felt, but he knew that things had to change. Ricardo had plenty more dirty work for him to do, and his sister's safety was always on the line. Marcoh knew that he had to find a way out of the criminal world before it consumed him completely, and the only way out was to kill again, to kill Ricardo. Ricardo must have felt Marcoh's killing intent and made sure he was never alone with him, but he was too cocky to think that'd be enough. Next time Marcoh went to the club to receive his next assignment, Marcoh beat Ricardo to death and threw his body off the club's second floor, right onto the dance floor, much to the shock of the dancers below. Now, a wanted criminal by the police and a traitor to the family, Marcoh found himself in a dire situation. He had to get out of the city. His phone rang, and it was his sister on the other side. She had been sent to Ricardo's summer villa in Vinland only a few days prior. Marcoh explained his predicament to her, and they decided to meet up in Rondon. It was clear that Marcoh could no longer stay in Vatican City and needed to act quickly before the police or the family caught up to him. He hopped on the first train that left the city and headed to an unfamiliar town called Prehevil in Bohemia. Marcoh wasn't sure where this town was, but he decided he could plan his next move as he traveled. He'd never left Vatican City. This would be the furthest he's ever been from home. Little did he know what horrors awaited for him when he arrived as one of Termina's contestants. Marcoh's fighting training would serve him well during the festival. He'd be putting his boxing and dodging skills to good use as he navigates what remains of Prehevil and encounters the crazed, moon-scorched villagers. Being able to dodge attacks and hit more often and harder would help keep him alive during all this madness. If moon-scorched, he becomes the Giant, a creature of rage, imprisoned in a cell in the otherworld version of the White Mold Apartments, appearing to be a creature that feeds off of his anger and rage as he smashes everyone around him. Karin, the journalist, the endless soul. I've covered wars. Yes, Karin, we know. You don't have to keep mentioning it. Karin was a curious child, having to be kept in line by family servants and her siblings. Her parents, newly ascended aristocrats in the Bremen Empire, were too busy with the affairs of high society to spend time with her and her brothers, leaving them mostly in the care of their nursemaid, Dahlia. Despite being highly respected, Karin's parents were outsiders among noble families, lacking strong roots and history in Bremen's blue-blooded society, having only recently become nobles. As tension rose within Bremen's borders due to the international political situation, the Sauer family's lack of strong lineage made them vulnerable. When riots broke out, Karin's parents entrusted her to Dahlia's care and instructed her to leave the country until things settled down. Or, at least that's what Dahlia had told her parents had said. Karin never heard her parents discuss this plan with Dahlia. That's the last that Karin would know about her parents for a long time, since their family estate was burned to the ground shortly thereafter, when a mob incited by one of the new populist leaders took over the estates, torches in hand. Having escaped the civil unrest, Karin and Dahlia traveled to Jataya, the capital of the Eastern Sanctuaries, now part of the Eastern Union. The culture shock was overwhelming for Karin, who had never seen such a stark contrast between poverty and wealth on the same street. Karin found herself living with Dahlia in a decent building, but suspected that Dahlia's source of income was not from her parents sending money, but rather from ransom payments. Kahara, another endless soul, was also from Jataya. However, living in the Eastern Empire gave Karin some perspective of the oppression carried out by those in power. Living abroad among the working class developed a sense of empathy in Karin, and she became involved with civil rights organizations. During a protest, Karin was targeted by the local army and after being knocked unconscious, woke up in a hospital. The Bremen embassy noticed her on television and took her into their custody, sending her back to her mother and her mother's new husband, her new stepfather, back in Bremen. Her father had died while the estate was burned to the ground during the unrest all those years ago. As she suspected, she was in fact kidnapped by Dahlia, who was living on ransom money up until this point. Karin would become a journalist, working at the Midnight Gazette, investigating the suspicious appointment of the Kaiser as the Chancellor of the Bremen Empire. She believed that the Kaiser had played a role in her father's death and was also involved with a secret society called the New Gods. Although she found connections between the Kaiser and the group, it sounded like a petty conspiracy theory. She needed more evidence and more information. The New Gods were known for controlling different nations from behind the scenes, and it was rumored that several people in modern global politics were linked to the shadowy cabal. The more she delved into the subject, the more evidence pointed towards the New Gods being behind the last two great wars that had devastated the world. There was no denying to Karin that something significant was brewing in Europa. When the Kaiser seized control of Prehevil, the capital of Bohemia, and then abruptly made a truce with the Eastern Union, alarm bells started ringing to Karin, as something was definitely amiss, and she made the decision to travel to Bohemia personally to investigate. Karin's drive to investigate these events unknowingly led her to becoming a participant in the Festival of Termina. Karin is recognized for her animosity towards the Kaiser and the Bremen army, referring to them as pigs, which some would say is an insult to a very kind and intelligent animal. She frequently used her platform as a journalist working at the Midnight Gazette to denounce the Kaiser and his government. She initially believes that the events in Prehevil and the mysterious dream are caused entirely by the Bremens, an assertive woman who is determined to reach her goal by any means necessary, sometimes coming off as rude. Karin is no stranger to hostile environments and quickly ventures into Prehevil to investigate what's happening. At first, she will be dismissive towards the other contestants and refuse their offers for help. However, she will eventually relent when she realizes the dangers within Prehevil are greater than she anticipated, and she might not survive working alone. Karin is initially adamant in her rejection of any notion of occultism or divine influence shaping the world. She fervently believes in seeking rational explanations for everything and remains dismissive of magic and religion, even in the face of undeniable evidence, such as the existence of real gods and others capable of casting magic right before her eyes. Despite the truth surrounding her, Karin remains resolute in her rational approach, though what she is seeing is making her second guess what she thought she knew of the world. The skills that she picked up as a journalist would serve her well during the festival. Being able to lockpick gave her access to otherwise inaccessible parts of the city, and her ability to persuade and talk a situation down would buy her more options during the encounters with the horrid surprises the city would have in store for her. The public often regards journalists as vultures who profit off of war casualties, but she views herself as a Valkyrie who immortalizes the story of the fallen. Maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. Her moon-scorched form seems to embody characteristics from both figures. As a moon-scorched Valkyrie, she often mentions, "I immortalize those fallen and perished. They will live forever in our memories," over and over again. Was she trying to convince us or herself? Though she frequently mentions that she has covered wars, she conveniently never mentions nor specifies which wars. During the festival, Karin makes her way to the city straight away, stopping only to take pictures of West Prehevil, which has become demolished in the recent invasion. Once in the city, she makes her way to the Prehevil news agency. She was likely trying to make contact with some of the local journalists that might be able to give her a heads up on the events in the city and the news of the Kaiser visiting. Marina, the occultist, the changeling soul. Marina was born in the Church of Allmer in Prehevil, where her lineage had been practicing archaic but brutal and cruel rites and rituals in order to appease the old gods. Her father is the currently leading dark priest of the church. Her mother was not an active participant in these rituals, and so wanted Marina not to follow in the footsteps of her father. The life of a dark priest is cruel, entailing a lifetime of grueling servitude to old gods, a life which her mother wished to spare her from. Therefore, despite being born a boy, Marina would be raised as a woman, effectively shielding her from the obligations of priesthood. She would grow up in the Church of Prehevil and would go off into an unorthodox path different from that of the Dark Priest. From here, her skills being a talented occultist will be noticed by the Vatican and their Ministry of Darkness. They even offered her to come and study at the Vatican, a scholarship of sorts, to learn more about her dark arts. She would take this chance to leave Prehevil, much in part due to her father's apparent disdain for her. Marina's mother would however be proud of her, as she always was. From there in the Vatican, she would learn and continue to refine her understanding of the occult. After some time studying the dark arts at the Vatican, she had to go back to that forsaken place because she was sent a letter from her father, informing her of her mother's sudden death. And from the tone of the letter, it seemed like he didn't care. It was suspicious as the two didn't have any sort of connection since Marina left for the Vatican. Marina did think something was wrong because her father was so obsessed with blood magic, and some blood magic techniques often demanded the blood of loved ones. She would go back, preparing herself to find out what has happened to her family in Prehevil. Little did she know about the bigger scheme that was going on and that she would play a part in as one of Termina's contestants. Marina was a curious young woman who speaks very informally. She often seems ready to speak her mind about any given situation and seems comfortable in most places. As a former resident of Prehevil, Marina was knowledgeable about different parts of the city and will freely share what she knows with others. She has an intense distaste for her hometown and does not seem disturbed by the disaster that has afflicted it. Despite the resentment she holds for her father and his status as a dark priest, she has stated that she would be glad if his lineage ended. During the festival, she would be kidnapped by the gentleman and held in the mayor's mansion. Once freed, she'd make her way to the bookstore and ultimately to the Church of Allmer to confront her father. She would rely on her knowledge of the occult during the festival. Her understanding of sigils and the power they can bring will help her odds, and her understanding of the occult will help her manage the entities and challenges that she would encounter once back in her hometown. If moon-scorched, she would become the cocoon, found in the basement of the Church of Allmer, her birthplace. Some theorize that she's carrying her father's dead body in the cocoon attached to her, maybe representing how she had always carried the burden of her father's judgment with her. Her father unable to value her for who she really is and all of her potential. Samerie, the Radiating Soul. Samerie is a secretive dark priest apprentice. In the Vatican City, she was part of an exclusive group of naturally gifted children who were sequestered in the ninth circle of Fiend Peter's Basilica. Here, their bodies would waste away in an ancient ritual designed to receive messages from the older gods. Samerie's innate affinity with these supernatural forces is evident in her versatility with magic, which includes blood magic, mind reading, and teleportation through red blood portals. However, these rituals have taken a significant toll on Samerie's physical body, causing her to deteriorate to the point where her lifespan is severely limited, a reality that she is acutely aware of. During her confinement, Samerie became infatuated with Marina, a regular student at the Vatican. This infatuation quickly evolved into an obsession, prompting Samerie to secretly observe Marina's every move, even resorting to reading her thoughts. When Samerie discovered that Marina plans to visit Prehevil to question her despised father about her mother's death, Samerie decided to travel to Prehevil to help or protect Marina. Despite Marina being unaware of her existence, little did she know that she was destined to become a player in the grand scheme orchestrated by the mischievous moon god Rher, who had chosen her to be one of the 14 Termina contestants. Samerie is a disturbed and obsessive young woman who will go to lengths to follow Marina. She seems willing to do anything to make Marina happy, including committing acts of violence. Despite this, she's incredibly secretive and actively hides herself from Marina and the others while on the train. Samerie's obsession with Marina is likely romantic, further enforced as when spoken to on the train as Marina, she will finish her dialogue with "love you." In Samerie's moon-scorched state, called dysmorphia, she assumes the form of a towering humanoid figure, her moon-scorched name representing the trauma of how she saw herself. Her repeated claims of being radiating support this interpretation, suggesting she believes her transformed state exudes a perceived ideal of herself, despite its grotesque nature. During the festival, she makes her way to the Church of Allmer to take vengeance on Marina's father in her name, stabbing him and then running away. She can be found later through the portal to Rher's otherworld dimension in the basement of the church. Tanaka, the salaryman, latent soul. Tanaka is a businessman who had traveled from the Far East to Europa to take advantage of the political turmoil, all in the name of his family business. he is encountered inside the train that transports the Termina contestants to Prehevil. After the dream sequence that all the contestants have when the game begins, he finds himself lost for words and does not answer if the player interacts with him. The poor man in a catatonic state due to fear. Tanaka appears nervous and somewhat neurotic. He is worried about failing his father and his business, and seems especially concerned that the train stopping will make him late for a meeting. Should he survive until later in the festival, Tanaka will become more assertive, training with Marcoh to improve his ability to fight. If he survives to the last night, he will become the Judgment, and be found wandering the halls of the museum. As the Judgment, he will repeat over and over phrases that reflect how he stressed over business and finance in his life, talking about the need for gold in the store, how the grind never stops, or the need to work faster and harder. Henryk the chef, suffocated so. Henryk is a 32-year-old chef from the kingdom of Daan with an acute taste for ingredients. Not much is known about his past, and seems adamant about keeping his life secret if prompted to speak up about it. Henryk's parents ran a tavern called Klimikov's, where he also worked but was always dreaming about becoming someone more important, capable of creating such as an artist or musician. He eventually dipped his toes into everything, but did not take well to rejection, and in the end gave up those plans. In his younger years, he would also be a bartender for some time, having had a fling with a female pianist that worked at the same place that he did. Eventually, Henryk ran out of money and, out of necessity, decided to go back to his parents' taverns where he started cooking meals. In the end, his natural talent for the culinary arts flourished to a point that Klimkovs became famous, even becoming the subject of an article on the local newspapers. Now, embracing this talent, he frequently travels to new culinary inspirations. One can imagine it is one of the reasons to travel to Prehevil, as he seems fascinated by the local delicacies and ingredients. Henryk appears to be very passionate about cooking food, having traveled to Prehevil just to explore its cuisine. His attitude could seem rather forward or perverted towards the women he takes an interest in, since one of his earliest interactions with Abella is attempting to flirt with her. When among the other contestants, Henryk endeavors to be useful by cooking meals for everybody, perhaps as a way to avoid conflict and appear non-threatening. However, as the festival progresses and the deadline approaches, he becomes increasingly anxious about the time limit and may resort to extreme measures if the opportunity presents itself. When moon-scorched, Henryk becomes a gentleman and takes up residence at the mayor's mansion. He speaks politely, almost diplomatically, and is obsessed with sampling the local cuisine. The gentleman holds the lion brass key, which the player will need. He can be fought or, if entertained over dinner with what he considers to be polite and pleasant conversation, he'd be willing to give away the key if someone asked. Caligura, the monster, decrepit so. Caligula is a mobster, hailing from the Vatican City. Caligula's cruel ways and his ghoulish appearance earned him the name Count Dragul among his peers. His reputation as a mobster is influential enough for the other characters to know who he is. Journalist Karin recognizes him from the train, and a possible altercation that he has with Henryk implies that the chef either heard of Caligura or actually ran into him before. He is a capo, or a captain, for a rival branch to the Accardos in the family. Caligura is a hostile, foul-mouthed man who is not above assaulting and murdering others. During the festival, he is one of the few select participants who will actively engage in killing the other contestants. Levi and Henryk will meet their ends at his hands unless the player intervenes. Abella and Marcoh will also be his targets if chosen as protagonist. Karin also mentions an encounter with the mobster, but she apparently managed to safely evade him. His name is probably inspired by the Roman Emperor Caligula. Well, let's just say we'd call him a bad boy by today's standards, even by Fear and Hunger standards. During the events of the festival, he would use his penchant for violence to intimidate, bully, kill, and steal his way through the events and the city. When moon-scorched, he turns into the monster. One of the nastier moon-scorched forms we'll be seeing in this tour of Prehevil. Multiple hands, and a design that alludes to anatomical stuff and things. He doesn't have much to say. Fittingly, you'd find him in the sewer underneath the city. August. Tormented soul. Not much information is available on August. It is apparent that he embraced a nomadic lifestyle, traversing various countries, a tradition upheld by his ancestors for generations. Aiming to break the cycle, he took steps to ensure his two children's stability by having them reside with their mother in Valen. Despite his commitment to this change, August retains a connection to his heritage, as he possesses Oldegardian lineage. His grandfather used to converse with him in their native language during his childhood. He is known for his martial and athletic skills. Throughout the festival, we see August hunting down creatures with his bow and arrow and parkouring across the roofs of the city. August claims to be in Prehevil for business purposes, yet it becomes evident that his true motive for being in town revolves around seeing the Kaiser. August is mysterious for much of the festival, revealing little about his origins or intentions to others. He is capable of defending himself and will assist others when able to do so. August has a grudge against the Kaiser and will attack him if given the opportunity to do so. He also has a special bond with Moonless and seems able to give her orders. He mentions that Moonless is an old family friend and they seem to know each other. August has learned from knowledge passed down to him from his ancestors, mastery of combat and survival, even if it means devouring the enemy's body itself. If the player has Karin in their party on day 3 and takes her to the temple district while August is alive, an altercation between them will occur. Karin accuses August of having a journal containing information about every Termina contestant, which she claims to have stolen from him. August is one of the 2 participants that do not survive until becoming Moonscorched, falling to the King in Yellow, or committing suicide to prevent becoming a monster. Pav. Pav's hometown in Voronia was destroyed by the Kaiser during the First Great War, resulting in the death of his friends and family. Seeking revenge against the man who caused the suffering and hoping to prevent others from experiencing the same, Pav joined the Bremen army with the ultimate goal of getting close to Kaiser and assassinating him. Through his dedication and skill, Pav rose through the ranks to become a lieutenant. Pav stands out at first by his fashion and the way that he speaks. At first glance, he appears almost enthusiastic about the chance for violence during the festival. Although Pav is unaware of the Kaiser's true intentions, he knew his leader's obsession with Prehevil and decided to follow him to the Bohemian city in hopes of finally getting his chance to strike. However, Pav's plans are put on hold when he was unexpectedly chosen as one of the 14 participants in the Termina festival. In a rush to depart for the city, Pav is one of the first contestants to leave the train. Pav hopes to bury his trauma deep and do what he has to do to get revenge. During the festival, we see Pav, like August, attempt to assassinate the King in Yellow, only to meet a similar fate. The Kaiser doesn't react to Pav's bullets and then cuts him down, dashing away Pav's hopes for revenge. We don't see Pav's moon-scorched form since he passes on due to his injuries before the night of the last day of the festival. So here we have the 14 participants of the Festival of Termina. Before departure, one by one they congregated as a train at the scheduled departure time, not knowing the crazy, inexplicable turn fate and the gods had in store for them. They might be unwilling participants in the Festival of Termina, however futile they would choose to resist. And so, another chapter in the never-ending fight between humanity on Earth and the gods in the beyond took place. In 3 days, it would all be over, one way or the other. 3 days under the sulfur sun. Okay, now that we know who the 14 participants are, let's take a tour of where the Festival of Termina will play out and check out the city of Prehevil, starting with the outskirts. All the contestants start the Festival of Termina at the train, which stop at the outskirts of the city. All the contestants will have fallen asleep, had the dream with Perkele, and then woke up to find the train stopped outside the city and abandoned by the crew. An ominous fog covers everything, hiding anything more than a few meters away, but at least it's daytime for now. In the nearby areas, you find some old residences, now abandoned or worse. The local flora is flourishing with a diverse spread of trees and herbs growing everywhere. Nearby, one of the first things we'll encounter is the Woodman's home. The Wretched being would tell us that he's responsible for many deaths during the festival, seemingly enjoying it. The wall writings in the basement of his house and the Woodman's letter show that he had a bad relationship with his wife, which at some point cheated on him with the goat outside. Sometime later, he murdered her, ultimately planning to unalive himself before he was interrupted at the beginning of the Termina festival. But yeah, that sucks for everybody involved. Well, maybe not the goat. Also nearby is a nice tranquil river. Alongside the shore, we find remnants of some statues, kinda highlighting a sense of decay in the city. Gunshots can be heard through the fog. Here, we find one of the first denizens of the area we'll be encountering, the modest rifleman, a local resident that appears to be wearing a lab coat, wielding a rifle. Attempts to talk to him only show that he is determined to spill blood. It's best to ambush him and disarm him if possible. Otherwise, he'll keep shooting randomly in the fog. Past the river, we arrive at the lake. It would be a charming lakefront any other day. Well, at least as long as the locals weren't doing any of their esoteric ancient rituals involving human sacrifices to the water. A bit further up in the lakefront, we get the first signs of what happened to the locals. We see moon-scorched locals mesmerized, talking about the moon and a green hue, all the while peeling flesh off of their arms and faces. Moon scorching is what happens when one is exposed to the corrupting effect of Rher's brilliant green radiation. In one of the makeshift residences in the slums, we find the Wretched being, who recently has taken to collecting heads as a hobby, as evidenced by the decorations on the wall. He is on the search for 2 more heads to round out his collection. The Woodman's head, since he went on a rampage and took out half the slums, and the decrepit priest Father Oscar's head. We won't find out why Father Oscar, but we learn about the priest of the region. It's not hard to imagine why. Continuing to move through the slums, we see the state of some of the local residents we're living in. It does seem like modernity taking its time moving into Prehevil. The Festival of Termina only made things worse. The few surviving locals slowly being consumed by the moon scorch. Daan would start his investigation into this medical mystery here, trying to study and help the locals. In one of the shacks, we find a hidden latch that leads to the underground bunkers, but we'll be visiting those later. At the far end of the slums, we make it to the Old Town. As the name implies, it's the oldest part of the city. Simple, modest, traditional residences, now ransacked or abandoned, livestock, and the mayor's manor. No roads, cars, shopping districts, nor restaurants here in Old Town. This area preserved older and simpler lifestyle than what we know of now in our modern capitalistic cities. This part of the city has resisted time better than the newer parts of the city. And with that came a dark and rich history of the occult. The smell of farm animals hits you as you notice a man in a pig mask, holding a pesticide tank spraying down some catch from the local fisheries. You can't fathom why he would be spraying fish down with pesticide, but he didn't seem like someone that's gonna take questions very well. People wearing pig masks tend to not respond well to questions. I mean, has anybody ever put on a pig mask with good intentions for their community? If you inspect his body after fighting him, you would discover that the mask has fused with this person's flesh, becoming attached, a part of his head. A crude crucifixion in the middle of the Old Town Square reminds you of the old dark ways are alive and well here in Prehevil. You wonder if the inhabitants of the slum crucify their own folk, or do they catch someone from outside the community, or a different part of town. A nearby shack used to be a neighborhood store in better days. The store owner's head is completely covered in bandages, and he's holding a doll, treating it like a real baby. The moon scorch had done some real damage to him. Levi mentions that the children from the orphanage would frequently shoplift candy from his store, until the bandaged man caught one of them in the act and hammered a nail through their palm. The major landmark of Old Town is the mayor's manor, which must have an open doors policy since the gate and the front door are open and unlocked. In any other situation, this would be an endearing trait of a small town. A mayor whose door is always open and the residents can just walk up and talk to the mayor. But we are in the Festival of Termina, in the old region of Earth, with secrets of dark powers. Today, the open door and gate were spine-tingling. The old gods have a way of twisting things on you. You enter the manor and you see Jeeves. You can't tell what's wrong with him, but you know he ain't right. He politely lets you know that the mayor is waiting for you upstairs. It's easy to appreciate his politeness. I'd rather be horrified by someone that's polite rather than be horrified by someone that's rude. We find the mayor on the second floor indulging what he describes as a selection of local cuisine. When you see what he's eating, it's easy to determine that you and the mayor have different tastes. But here you have the option to fight him or sit through dinner with him. Unclear which is the easier option. But once you resolve the encounter, you get one of the 2 keys needed to enter the city. If you explore the rest of the 2nd floor, after dinner, you'll find a bedroom that locks from the outside, great for the less than willing house guests. A bit further down from this locked door, there is the dark priest that the Wretched being mentioned, Father Oscar. His head was one of the most sought after in the city these days. Beneath the mayor's manor, we find the food stores. For some reason, the mayor has been stockpiling food here. We also find a chainmail, a bit old-fashioned, but it gets the job done. Entering the city, we see the restaurant Billy Vu. I have no idea how you pronounce that. This restaurant would have been a great place to meet friends for lunch and then go walking downtown to the plaza for a beer on better days. Today, it's a target for scavenging for old food and finding shelter from the horrors that roam the street. Levi will at some point try to find comfort and shelter here, as his withdrawals kick in. He was doing his best to manage them, but they were awful. A bit further down, you find evidence of the Bremen's army cruelty towards the locals, as you see some of the locals executed against the wall. War is hell. It's in this part of the city where the Bobbies are on patrol. They are perversions of former civil servants who had suffered being moon-scorched. There was a time where they served the local town, now they serve the local trickster moon Rher. They patrol in their old uniforms and immediately attack any survivor that they see in the name of justice. Their heads move in unnatural ways, make your neck hurt just by looking. It's hard not to notice all the coffins in the city. I guess it's not surprising. What is surprising is that some of them appear to be chained shut. Why would you need to chain a coffin? Are people so desperate they're turning to the departed for food? Or is it to keep something in the coffin? Okay, so now let's explore what's underneath the city. The sewers. You know the old saying, for a good time, go to the sewers. Said no one ever. The sewers underneath Prehevil have been getting a lot more traffic these days. Initially, during the invasion of the Bremen Empire, the Eastern Union resistance forces would use the sewers to move around and avoid the combat above. And then again, during the recent chaos of the festival, as people and monsters alike both moved into the sewers to either hunt or hide. Down here, we'd see the neighbor creatures, what must be some deformed locals. It seems to be wearing a shirt backwards, or is it that his limbs bend backwards? Elbows are weird enough. No need to think about backward bending elbows. The neighbor creatures has massive organic mauls or bludgeons as hand, reminiscent to some monsters from Silent Hill 3. The bludgeons as hands makes them look kinda like the Iron Shakespeare, but made of flesh. So a flesh Iron Shakespeare. Yeah, that's a good name. So maybe a regular Shakespeare? Not surprisingly, the sewer is also where you'd find the moon-scorched Caligula that we talked about earlier in the video. Finding him in sewage is kinda poetic, and like Caligula always said, choke on my balls. Also, be careful of the wasp nest in here, you won't like them. There's more to see underneath the city, other than the rivers of sewage. But we'll be back. East Prehevil. Here we'll find the local bookstore, and at different times Marina, comfortably laid back exploring the selection of occult books. Or was it Marina's doppelganger? On the 2nd floor we'd find a ritual circle, which kinda emphasizes that the bookstore keeper probably had a vast library on the occult, and the region's other dark secrets and history. Seeing how this is the only bookstore in the area, the store owner probably had access to some of the most occult books in the region. On the streets in front of the bookstore and the hotel, we can see barricades blocking off the streets. Must have been the resistance when the Bremen Empire moved in, and then the occupiers must have left them up since it would make the city easier to divide and control. Did the locals use these defensive barricades to try to survive the festival and the invasion? Or did the monsters and the Bremen army use them to hunt and corner their prey? On the next block east, we see the Church of Allmer, but on approaching, you might catch a sight of Rancid the Sergal, showing a Bobby how to best use the spear to perform a proper colonoscopy. But we'll talk more about him in a bit. Entering the church, we see an elaborate stained glass 3-panel array, showing 3 different scenes. The Fellatio of Humanity, showing humanity on its knees in front of the Ascended One, Allmer. The Ascension of Francois, the man that tried to overcome its idols. And the 3rd panel represents humanity before the god of fear and hunger, called Hunger and Vengeance. We see a scene play out, Samerie stabbing the father Domek, Marina's father. She was taking revenge on him on Marina's behalf without her knowledge or consent, robbing Marina of a final chance to confront her father and find out what really happened to her mother. the only person Marina was able to count on and that loved her throughout her life. The rest of the cathedral is cold, but elegant and imposing. There is a certain majesty to the marble columns, the floor, and the dark vaulted ceiling. You can hear your footsteps echo in the large cavernous room. Or did you hear shuffling up above you in the rafters? Above the main hall, you would find some pillarmen. Pillarmen get their name from their function at the Church of Allmer, to be tied to the church pillars and cry their gospels to the church-going folk below. It is unknown how the pillarmen developed their abs, but we know they must have been packing in the protein and not skipping leg day. While the church looks clean and well maintained at the ground level, it was in the basement where the church's secrets lay. It was probably one of the worst kept secrets in Prehevil that the priests of the church were practitioners of the dark arts and still conducted rituals to the old gods. The church would source its sacrifices from the orphanage and from the slums, targeting vulnerable people that they thought nobody would miss. Examining the pools of blood in the basement and the presence of the Crimson Fathers, it appears as if during the festival the congregation had conducted a ritual that backfired and summoned the Crimson Fathers, which then proceeded to slaughter the congregation trapped in a maze of barred and locked rooms in the basement. The Crimson Fathers appear to be snail-like entities which lack the ability to articulate verbal language. However, its bottomless, striking eyes possess an eerie depth that enables it to establish a profound telepathic connection with its target. The idea and concepts conveyed through this connection are often bizarre, otherworldly, and unintelligible to humans, just attesting that these creatures are not from anywhere nearby. The Crimson Fathers are driven by an insatiable thirst for blood, as evidenced by the blood pools and the cadavers scattered throughout its habitat. They appear after an extensive bloodbath or slaughter, much like snails after rain. Creatures appear to possess an inexplicable link to the sulfur god, as it can conjure its likeness in people's minds. And since the sulfur god is all the parts of Allmer that did not ascend, that is not an image that many people find pleasant. Down here, we also find multiple ritual circles. The church basement and the orphanage are the two locations with the most amount of ritual circles, implying that both of these places that should have offered protection and safety were actually where the most dark magic was being practiced in the city. One of the ritual circles in the basement is found with a sigil of Rher on it, creating a portal to the otherworldly dimension. This is where Samerie fled after stabbing Father Domek, and where we would find her in her moon-scorched form, Dysmorphia. But enough of this place, it's giving me the creeps. Let's go back up to the surface. Leaving the church and heading out to the street, let's continue our trek east. More coffins, made of scrap wood, improvised. The town must have run out of stock of coffins pretty fast, and then they had to start making makeshift ones. The sounds of active gunfire ring through the alleys of the cobblestone street. One of the few sounds you've heard on the streets that wasn't groaning or the shuffling of some creature. And the first loud sounds you've heard since you've entered the city, other than August doing parkour across the rooftops. Descending the stairway, you find a Bremen elite doing the work that the Bremen army had been doing on the locals. Shacks and shanties can be found here again, suggesting that those that lived here were destitute. With the population moon-scorching, it seemed that the Bremen army is playing it safe and eradicating the population, as evidenced by the piles of bodies you see in this lakeside area of the city. Why do the poor always have to be the ones that suffer the worst during any catastrophe? Noticing the smell of rotting fish in the barrows, we head back to the center of the city, West Prehevil. Heading further into West Prehevil, we'll find the white mold apartments. Entering the apartments initially seems like a good idea, since the building seems so well preserved and is eerily quiet. Taking a few more steps in makes it easy to see why this is not so. Going through the rooms, you see glimpses of the lives that used to be and used to fill these halls. An apartment filled with plants, which the owner must have put in a lot of work to take care of them. An apartment filled with puppets. A new tenant that just moved in that must have been excited to live in the heart of the city. The apartment of a woman that loved to sing. And another apartment of an avid star watcher with telescopes pointing at the sky. The telescopes were pointing at the sky, right? You find notes of a serial killer that also lived in this building. He would need sacrifices of all the apartments mentioned to complete his nameless ritual. Kind of reminiscent of the antagonist in Silent Hill 4, taking his prey from an apartment building. You try not to think about how the serial killer must have gone upon his grisly business in this place. Solving the serial killer washing machine puzzle, we get access to another worldly version of the Whitewood apartments, a perversion of the apartment buildings with the homes turned into cells. where headless bodies are pumped for some fluid that someone is harvesting. This area is patrolled by more neighbor monsters, the moon-scorched inhabitants of a once pretty and tranquil community. Heading further west, we'll find more of the grisly work that the Bremen army carried out. We pass up a plaza and fountain dedicated to Sovian, the old god. Her worship still very much a thing in this old city. The old gods were never far in Prehevil, though her cult did also remain alive a little bit in some other parts of Europa, as we could tell by Daan's backstory. The rest of West Prehevil shows that this is the side that the Bremen army must have approached from, or where the resistance fought back. This part of the city is still mined, and most of the buildings have been leveled in the fighting. The Kaiser must have given the order to raise this part of the city with artillery, regardless of the civilian casualties. The local newspaper had its office here. No doubt they got more footage and stories than they needed when all the fighting was going on. Karin would make her way here in hopes of being able to contact local journalists to maybe find out a little bit more about what is happening in the city. In a more intact part of Prehevil, we find the clothing shop. In the basement, we can find the irrational obelisk. I love this encounter. I thought it was really creative and original. It's a massive pile of clothes with unlimited health that will continually drain your mental health, but doesn't do anything else. It's supposed to represent the drain on your mental health that having and failing to do laundry presents. I personally feel attacked by the presence of this encounter in the game and its commentary on the state of my laundry, which I'm going to state is always done and clean and organized, and I'm also going to claim that I've never told a lie. A little down the street, down some nondescript stairs, we find what must have been one of the liveliest spots of the cities, in better times, the Prehevil Bop. A little speakeasy beneath the street level, nice and cozy with wooden decor and finish. If you inspect the corner, you discover another lair beneath the speakeasy. Maps, bunk beds, weapons. Abella would inform you that this place is an NLU safe house for the rebels operating in the region, but no traces of any NLU agents around, other than a map of the city with 4 distinct locations circled in red. These would be the locations of the 3 teleelectroscope stations that power and connect to the logic. More on these when we talk about the bunkers. But what did happen to the NLU agents that Abella was hoping to meet up with? Seems that everybody on the train was hoping to meet a local contact that's disappeared. It's not a stretch to think that they didn't survive recent events. Dark days these were. On the way to the department store, we hear the bell of an inquisitor. The inquisitor yells out lines condemning the infidels and saying that the weak need to perish. The inquisitor says, "Allmer be my judge, I will be executioner and a jury." Avoiding or dealing with the Inquisitor, we see another horror descend from above, the Soul Job, a bizarre amalgamation of body parts sewn into an umbrella-like shape. Fortunately, these are not too hard to take down. Not exactly the biggest brained creatures, because they don't have a head. We pass up the Ranka Cafe with some nice outdoor seating. On a nice Saturday night, this must have been the place to have dinner, a cup of coffee, and catch some live music on the walkway. But let's continue into the department store. Immediately after seeing this almost return to modernity and normality, you hear something that shatters the illusion. Faint but deep bellowing coming from the upper levels of the department store. So much for a break of the stream of horrors from the old world. Making your way to the top level of the department store, you discover the source of the bellowing. You see a group of men and women suspended from chains, and at some points being pulled apart by them. You cannot think of why somebody would end up here, but it's noted that it appears that some of them were here willingly. This must be another visceral ritual to the old gods from time long since past of the cruel era. All this was performed over the main area of the department store, as if a reminder that no matter how far humanity progresses, they'll always have the old gods hanging over them. Exiting out the other way of the department store, we pass by Dr. Kiefer's Tricks and Magics, one of the few places you can use your chillings that you've picked up so far on your journey. Here, you can get your hands on different magic items that might give you an edge in the trials ahead. Betel stones to refill mine, small thing amulets for more agility, soul stones to unlock more skills, rings of still blood to stop bleeding, and more. Moving past the barrier, very clearly asking you not to enter, you can find a pole, a spiritual entity that lingers with the corpses of people after death. A special animation may play out if the pole grabs the character after losing the coin flip. We are close to the Orphanage now. The Orphanage is a distinct place in Prehevil, a place of innocence and where innocence is lost. The music is eerie and peaceful. as if it played to the lost dreams of the children that ended up here. Shadow of lost children roamed the halls, probably looking for the shelter in the afterlife that they didn't find in this one. Everyone here must have been moon-scorched, since there are so many fallen cherubs and decrepit priests here. These children had deserved better than what St. Domek's orphanage had given them. Founded by Father Domek, Marina's late father, the monsters here do not pose much of a threat, but appear to be more of a reflection of the violence these poor young souls faced in real life. The orphanage feels like the most somber and tragic part of the entire city. The orphanage was the center of extreme abuses levied at the orphans by the priest. Not only were the students treated badly by the staff, there are rumors that some of the orphans disappeared without a trace. Children's skeletons can be found in the building's basement, suggesting that these orphans were murdered or sacrificed. One of the head priests, Father Hugo, was rumored to be a vampire due to his apparent affinity for blood, which was likely used in rituals to the old gods. Even children who avoided being sacrificed and left his care did not escape the watchful eyes of the priest, who kept extensive, intrusive documentations about their lives. The other world in the orphanage shows what it must have been the fate of so many children, like Levi, that were conscripted and sent off to war as child soldiers. The other world here imitates a series of trenches where the child soldiers would have languished in mud before meeting their violent ends. Here, we find a lot of Rontrals, an enigmatic entity with a hollow form, delving within the shadows and bearing no resemblance to any earthly life. Myths of Rontaal have traversed countless generations, each tale different from the other. Legend has it, Rontaal emerged initially within the realms of nightmares, using the fear it evokes to manifest its presence in the physical world. The orphanage and its unique brand of darkness lingers over you even as you leave the location, much like it did for the orphans. Let's go back out to nature. The deep forest. Approaching the deep forest, West Prehevil opens up. In the fog of the forest, we find evidence of some of the old history of this region. Weird owl cultists live in this part of the woods. They are very in tune to the spirits of their ancestors and will use them against you. Here in this old forest, we find ruins of an older Prehevil before roads, hotels, and restaurants were built. Tucked further into the forest, past a centaur, we find another entrance to the underground. Another bunker that the armies that fought over this region must have built. But we'll be back soon enough. Returning to another region of the underground and going back to the sewers. If you make your way past the sewage treatment plant puzzle, you'll find a way down to the tunnels underneath the city that are lit up by green and blue hues or glow. Vast amount of herbs and mushrooms can be found growing down here. The skittering of the ratkin echo down the halls. These rat creatures were probably like this well before the start of the festival. Following the caverns, you see a series of eyes light up in the darkness and start approaching you. Out of the shadows, you see a massive cave-dwelling dog. It's Moonless, from when the god of fear and hunger was born. Moonless attacks. You notice the swords embedded in his hide. One of them is a legendary cursed sword, the Miasma. No word on how the Miasma ended up in Moonless, but it's better that it's contained there, rather than the miasma being out tempting people to use it. After exchanging some blows with Moonless, August appears out of the darkness in the side of the cavern, getting Moonless to calm down and stop attacking. He explains that she is an old family friend, and she didn't mean to attack, she's just defensive of her territory. Moonless is a good dog. Moving on to one of the last stops of our tour, we activate the tunnel in the Church of Allmer and descend into the tunnel that will lead to the Alley of the Mausoleums. Entering a large open room with a massive statue, we see Rancid the Sergal again. Rancid hails from Vinland and introduces himself as Mataneko Kone Magnificat. He comes from the proud race of Sergals. They thrive in battle and combat. He's come to Prehevil for some reason, looking for a worthy fight. After trading some blows, he realizes that you are not what he is looking for and disengages. He doesn't tell you who he's looking for, but it's not you. With his departure, you can continue on to one of the last areas of the city. Reaching the surface again, we emerge in the Mausoleum Alley. Like the name implies, a somber alley filled with mausoleums. Making it just a little bit of the way down, you'll find an ambush of bell ends. These dark creatures of the night that hold spears that are able to harden their skin against your attacks, creating a nuisance. We find an exit to the tower and the museum, the two areas of interest for the endgame. Upon approaching the hollow tower, we see the impaled townsfolk in the plaza. A grim reminder of how little human life matters when it comes to the affairs of the gods, new or old. A vile imitation of Vlad Tepes the Impaler's notorious way of striking fear into everybody. If the other contestants are dead and there's only one survivor, the survivor will have the option to attend to the top of the hollow tower and face Perkele, and potentially have a chance to fight the trickster moon god Rher for a chance to escape the city. Though neither fight will be easy. Perkele has strong magic attacks that can channel his connection from Rher, constantly bombarding the contestants with his meteorite attacks and feather barrages. Making things worse, the contestant would have limited help since all the other contestants would have perished at this point. Confronting Rher is not easy. His many eyes will drain the contestant's mind and make him snap and give in, while attacking with Moon Scorch attacks or summoning physical attacks from the memory of the 4 protagonists of the first game. If the contestant is able to look this old god in the face and best him in combat, the contestant will have won his freedom and be the sole survivor of the Festival of Termina, able to live out the rest of their natural lives with any sense of peace that they are able to muster after everything they have witnessed here in Prehevil, and knowledge of the existence and scheming of the new and the old gods. The Museum. Next to the Hollow Tower is the Prehevil Museum. As you approach, you see Pocket Cat with a wheelchair. Wonder what he's up to. Entering, you see an enchanted and cursed ball going on. Everyone is dressed in their finest and wearing elegant Venetian masks. Talking to the guests doesn't cause a reaction in them. They are frozen in place like a mannequin. Like somebody wanted to pretend that there was a ball going on, but wasn't able to find anybody wanting to attend. Walking around the museum will disorient anybody, since it appears that there are special rules of how the rooms connect, and there's something distorting your sense of space. After having explored, you can open the clock puzzle and descend. And just another note, impossible physics and the distortion of space is a common trope in survival horror. We can see similar examples at the end of Signalis and Silent Hill 2. For a more detailed look at this part of the game, and the journey to the Machine God and what it means, check out my video, What is the Machine God? Link in the description. I don't want to repeat myself too much, so go check out the video, I think you'll like it. And it will give you a good overview of Legard's plan and what he was planning to do with Rayla and the Machine God, or the logic. But as I've been teasing this entire video, let's talk about what's underneath the city in the bunkers. So Tunnel 1, this is the bunker that we found at the entrance of the deep forest, going past the centaur. You would descend into a bunker, and here we would find different results of human experimentation. Stitches has had her mouth sewn partially shut, and has numerous sewn cuts scattered across her body. Daan would mention that she resembles his fiancée, Elise. She's probably the creator of other monstrosities, such as the soul job that we encountered in the city, and the living flesh. The living flesh appears to be a lump of flesh made of different limbs, parts, and flesh attached. It has no discernible head or noticeable extremities. It doesn't do anything else than try to attack anybody near it. Is it sentient? Oh, I don't know. The world doesn't need this type of horrors in it, and it's probably in constant suffering. We also find another experiment of the flesh, a writhing, pulsing thing, made up of attached humans. The only other item of interest in Tunnel 1 will be the tele-electroscope station here, needed to power up to access the logic. But let's move on. Tunnel 4 is accessible after a fight with Moonless, and the main interesting thing here is that it holds one of the 3 tele-electroscope stations and Tanaka's doppelganger. Tunnel 7 is one of the first ones we would encounter in the game, and is one of the first places we would find the odious Needles. Needles is an exceedingly cruel individual whose permanent clownish grin, his heavily scarred and burned muscular physique concealed beneath his clothing. As his moniker suggests, he uses needles in combat and demonstrates a keen understanding of various substances and their effects when injected. Needles apparently takes great pleasure in hunting down the Termina contestants in Prehevil, relishing in the process with bouts of laughter. He actively seeks out his targets, displaying an eagerness to eliminate them. Daan will remark that Needles resembles his father-in-law, Baron Einher von Dutch. It is uncertain whether Needles still retains any semblance of his former self as the Baron, or if he's merely the vessel of another force being controlled. We do not like Needles. Let's rub some broken glass in his eyes. Down here is the third electroscope station that needs to be activated to get ending A with the machine god in the White Bunker. And the last area of the game is the White Bunker. This area is covered in more detail in my What is the Machine God video, so go check that one out. But here's the summary. After fighting past the platoon commander, the Kaiser, or the King in Yellow, we reach the Chamber of the Machine God, the new form of Olivia's sister Rayla. This is the new god that the Kaiser is trying to awaken as a challenge to the old gods. Any of the participants that enter the White Bunker, tragically, never exit the bunker. Their sacrifice does mean that the other participants that have survived this long will be able to survive the events of the festival and go home. Okay, well, let's talk about what would happen to the characters if they are the ones to survive the events of Termina. Day 4, Ending B. Daan. Well, that solved nothing. All this and you were still none the wiser. Mystic deities, unknown gods, unholy rituals, nuggets of information. Were the answers buried somewhere among all this madness? Would the answers even matter anymore? If Baron von Dutch had dirtied his hands with blood, then you have reveled in bloodbath in comparison to get where you are now. You hear the heavy footsteps of that wicked cat. He knows what you've done. In Prehevil and before, the cat is circling around you in darkness, just beyond your line of sight. Maybe you should just take his offer. What else have you got going for you? Nothing. That's right. It's peculiar, isn't it, old sport? The life that is. Abella, you couldn't sleep after what you had witnessed in Prehevil. You knew too much about the universe and what horrors it hid in the darkness of the night. The endless void above you in the sky taunted you. It laughed at you. You had finally realized how minuscule humans truly were in the grand scheme of things. Your insomnia almost drew you insane, but you had always been one to look for answers and solutions. Surely, there was an answer to be found here too. The moon had paid you a visit and gazed at you for a brief second. To ask for answers, you would need to pay the moon god a visit too. You took positions in fields that study space technology. Over the years, things started to advance, and only after a decade, you were able to get ready to launch people to the moon. You'd get an audience with the moon soon. Not with ancient rituals or occult, but thanks to technology and human wit. Whether it was a good idea remained to be seen. Levi. After the events that transpired in your hometown, there was no looking back anymore. It was for the better. You were forced to cut all your ties to the past. It was liberating. You were finally free. Or that's how it felt for the first few weeks at least. Slowly, everything you had witnessed started to weigh on you. To push back all the misery and horrors, you drifted from one place to another, never growing roots to any specific place, always on the run so you wouldn't have to confront the past. You'd arrive to a new city, in a new country, do whatever work you got for a while, until the events of Prehevil started to invade your nightmares once again. That's when you knew it was time to go again. Maybe one day you'd get far enough so the past couldn't follow you anymore. Or maybe the past would finally catch up with you. Olivia. Something good actually came from your traumatic experiences in Prehevil. It did take years of therapy to realize this, but slowly you understood what you were truly capable of. You were the champion of Termina. You, in your wheelchair and all, somehow, you were the sole survivor in what took place in that godforsaken backwaters town. You also started to feel the spirit of your sister as years went on. She was accompanying you everywhere you went. You never fully understood what happened to her, but she followed you every step of the way since you too left that wicked city. You gained courage and confidence from that ordeal. With that newly found confidence, you set out to the most remote locations in the world to study their flora and fauna. You had learned that nature took care of you no matter where you went. You didn't have the limitations of a human body anymore. For the first time in your life, you felt true freedom. Osa, the cult of Sulfur, the followers of Rher, the Church of Allmer, were they any different from the Yellow Mages? They all served someone else ultimately. Your master just happened to be a foul-mouthed old raisin, whom time had forgotten. You threw your master to the nearest lake. Maybe some poor bastard would find him there centuries later and be led like a fool on a leash to do their master's bidding. But that was not your part any longer. You returned to Abyssinia, your homeland. The reason you had initially left the whole continent was because of the state of religion and worship there. The teachings of Allmer had taken over the old beliefs. You had gathered enough knowledge and skills on your travels to rival what the local temples promoted. These lands would follow your teachings in the future, teachings that would benefit the ones practicing your ways, not the ones in power, nor the establishment. One could almost be fooled into thinking that this was an altruistic act. Of course, in a true yellow mage manner, you'd be the one on top of the pyramid this time. Karin, the events of Prehevil shook you to your core. Suddenly, many things in life felt meaningless against this overwhelming realization of what hides behind the veil between the known and the unknown. As you returned back to civilization, you understood that your experiences would sound like the ramblings of a madman if you ever tried to put them down on paper. You needed proof before you could open your mouth, and you had witnessed the rumors about the new gods and the Kaiser in real life. You knew they were real. This was only half the job already. Now, you only needed to convince the rest of the world of this forbidden information. This goal helped you get by each day. You needed clear goals to block the dread out of your mind. You start digging like you always had before. Sooner or later, you will get to the root of things. It remains to be seen whether your sanity will withstand the truth or not. Marcoh, the city of Prehevil was meant to just be a stepping stone on your path to greener pastures. Instead, it turned out to be the place that shaped the very person you ended up becoming. Your sister was waiting for you in the kingdom of Daan. That was the plan. She welcomed you, unknowing the horrors you had to witness on your way there. You never spoke of your experiences. Even those events ate you up every night as you lay down to sleep. People walked the streets of Daan every day without knowing what was lurking in the shadows of every dark corner of the world. It was better that they didn't know how helpless they truly were against the cosmic horrors out there. But you could help them prepare if they ever had to come face to face with anything of that nature. You started running a boxing gym with your expertise. The attendants would step inside in hopes of learning how to defend against common street thugs, but they would step outside ready to face the unknown. Saving people's lives like this alleviated some of your inner guilt. You had taken lives of many, but maybe you could finally give something back as well. Marina, you didn't have any burdens left from your old life. It was a bittersweet feeling. Your ties to your family and past were severed thanks to the traumatic events that transpired in Prehevil. The thoughts of returning to Vatican City to continue your studies didn't sound appealing, not after everything you've seen. Some things were not meant for humans to meddle with. As years went on, you drifted all the way to the country of Volan and found yourself settling down at the red light districts of the capital. You had trouble fitting in with regular people who were unaware of the greater scheme of things. But from the people that inhabited the red light districts, you found kindred spirits. Everyone carried baggage there, and no one judged no one. Occult skills help you make friends easily, and there are many ways you can make a living there with the help of a little magic. Things were pretty nice actually. Now, if you could only tell who this photobombing person was, she had been trying to make friends with you for the longest time. Pretty annoying. I think if there is another installment in the franchise, we'll find out that the canonical ending for part 2 is similar to part 1, in that it's a combination of the multiple endings we can get throughout the game. So if I had to place a bet, I think that the canonical ending would involve the machine god ascending, some of the old gods like Rher, and their remaining traces fading even more, and some characters surviving, and some characters dying during the events of Termina and Prehevil. Personally, I'd like to see more of Abella's story. I love the idea of humanity fighting the moon. And I have no idea what direction a story like that would go, but I'd be so curious to see where Mira could go with that story. And if you stuck it out this far, I just want to say thank you very much. I quite enjoy making these videos, and I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Thank you for all the insight and comments on my previous videos. I've actually learned quite a bit, among other things, how I'm supposed to try to pronounce Ragvadar. I'll get it one day. Let's do a capitalism real quick. It's looking like I have fairly good chances of being able to do this full time going into 2024. If you'd like to help me towards that goal, and you're in a position to, consider checking out the membership tiers. I will be doing member-only polls in the future about what video games and what lore I should make videos on. But either way, any watch, likes, comments, shares are all a big help, so thank you very much. And I'm also been flattered by the reception of my previous video, Dungeons of Fear and Hunger. I just want to say thank you. I'm flattered. And it's made me happy, so I appreciate it. I should be putting a link in the description to where you can download some of the images I've used. And if you're interested in any other, just let me know. I can make them available to you. Any recommendations on any other games I should explore? My schedule is booked for the next few weeks, but let's see where time takes us. So long, take care, and thank you very much. Later.